Okay, hi everyone. Let's see. Okay. Hi everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm going to wait a couple more moments to make sure that everyone has a chance to join us. We have quite a few folks from different organizations and different time zones, so it's exciting to have everyone kind of all in one place to learn a little bit more about our omnichannel offering and our partner Market Performance Group. And feel free at any time to include questions in the chat. We will have someone monitoring the chat, and we will reference those questions at the end of the presentation. So if something comes to mind, feel free to include that. Okay, great. I'm going to get started. Welcome everyone to the Omnichannel Unpacked episode 3, part 3 of our 3-part series. This is a Retailer Roundup with Market Performance Group. So we have Heather from Market Performance Group joining us to talk a little bit more about omnichannel fulfillment and how you can manage your relationships with retailers and get into retail as a new sales channel. So high-level overview, a little bit about us. My name is Meg Glavey. I am the Senior Partner Manager for Platform Partnerships here at ShipBob. I've been a partner manager for nearly 2 years now, managing all of our relationships with the partners that help facilitate our B2B ecosystem. So that includes our EDI partners, that includes partnerships with the retailers themselves, and also relationships and partnerships with retail sales channel consultants or brand channel strategy organizations such as Market Performance Group. And I want to give Heather the opportunity to introduce herself too as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm Heather Campain. I am the VP of Omni-Commerce Acceleration at Market Performance Group. Super excited to be here. And what I do at Market Performance Group is connect the dots around the Omni-Commerce Acceleration model, which I'll talk about later. And super excited to help clients grow their businesses at a variety of retailers.
Great. Thanks, Heather. Yeah, and just a little bit of kind of a look back on the webinar series so far. So the kind of overarching theme and sort of goal of this webinar series is to explain to our merchants, our customer base, our prospect, anyone who might be listening about how easy it is to add new sales channels as a direct-to-consumer e-commerce brand. So why go omni-channel? Why is it important to sell on more than one platform? Why is it important to have more than one sales channel? By and large, it's more ways to get customers. It's more ways for your customers to find your products organically and be able to buy your products in different places. Some customers prefer to have a brick and mortar option in addition to e-commerce. Some are, retail agnostic, so they might go to a number of retailers. So increasing the visibility of your products across many different channels really can help with that customer conversion and increase GMV. Driving loyalty through convenience and availability. So that's really crucial as well, right? So some of the D2C and retail offerings with ShipBob, so that 2-day delivery, drop ship to the end customer, relatively easy retail distribution with ShipBob as well through some of our EDI partners and our relationships with retailers. It's more convenient than ever to make sure that you have a fully fleshed out relationship with a retailer and have your products in those spaces. And I will hand it over to Heather. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Heather, if you want to start sharing yours.
Sure. All right. Are you seeing that? Did it share correctly?
I am not seeing it.
Okay. Let me just try again. Hold on just 1 second.
I can also I'll leave it up and we can just go from there. How does that sound?
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, just give me the cue when you need me to move to the next slide.
Sounds great. Super excited to be talking retail, my favorite topic. I have been in the CPG industry. I started as a mid-career professional and have worked the entire time. I've been in CPG alongside customer teams, so really excited to be talking retail today. I can go ahead. And then I wanted to share a little bit about Market Performance Group. We are a full service establishment end to end. So we offer all of the services and we have great partnerships with people like ShipBob on some of those E2E endeavors. And then we work across a wide variety of clients that are both large and small. And then this gives you just a smattering of some of the different retailers that we work with. And we do work and recommend working as a total omnichannel provider so that we can connect those dots and drive the synergy that's needed to really maximize your performance. We can go ahead and move to the next slide. And then in addition to the selling and managed services, we also run a lot of digital media, which with 60% of our store sales being impacted by digital, having the capability to do this on top of that is what we're seeing is increasingly important. And just on the next slide, I'll take you through the way that we see the dots coming together and how to best drive your business. We can go ahead and advance. And so here's the way that we think about it is really getting in at retail and doing your item setup and maintenance, which sometimes people gloss over that, but that's really ground zero for what your performance will look like, especially as it relates to digital. And then of course, making sure that your availability, your product is available. Whew, easy for me to say, both in store and online. And then thinking about your shelf placement, where you want to be in store, but then also how you want to be showing up online. And then as you round the circle, really getting into what those growth drivers are in your paid search and display, and then how you drive traffic and create conversion. So, so I work on a team bringing all of those pieces together and making sure that we're maximizing performance. And then as you're thinking about entering retail, we can go ahead and flip to the next slide. Here's some good considerations as you're determining if you want to go into retail as one of your selling channels, and really making sure that you're thinking about the strategic fit, who you're trying to sell to, and making sure that that particular retailer is good to selling to the audience that you want to be selling to, and then thinking about your mutual margin compatibility, what margin you want for your products, but then also what margin that the retailer is expecting. And then also making sure that your sales are aligned with what their expectations are. And importantly, your infrastructure capability. Does that retailer have the tech stack and the infrastructure in place that allows you to do you? And then thinking about the connectedness as you enter retail, are the different aspects of their business aligned? So as you're thinking about merchandising and then marketing, do they do a good job of aligning and connecting those dots, or is that something that's going to inhibit the growth of your product? So this is just a little bit of criteria as you start thinking about going into retail, some of the things that you want to consider.
Okay, and so we have some questions. I know everyone has, when it comes to retail, people tend to have a lot of questions. So we kind of culled a list that we have that we think that Heather can speak to that kind of answer some of the high level questions about how to get into retail and really what it makes sense to be, how it makes, how it works or how it makes sense to be a brand that sells in retail. So top of that list would be, is retail right for every brand, Heather?
And so I think you really have to determine, is retail right for your brand, or how you go about it, whether you're direct to consumer or you are entering that retailer. And as I mentioned the criteria from the last slide, really thinking about, what does your margin picture look like? What are your expected velocities? Where are you in your life cycle? And so I think really thinking about, can your business model support that? Are you looking to scale? Are you incubating? So there's a lot of questions that you need to answer in terms of determining, is retail right for you? Or are you ready for retail? And then what is that retailer vested in your outcome? So, and I think it really, it's a brand by brand decision, because are you a small incubator brand and you're going to need help? There's a lot of retailers you see now, like Walmart and Target, that are actually hosting these incubator programs, and they want to help companies build the next great thing. So you can get a lot of support that way. And then if you're more mature and you're in one place and you need to grow your brand, or you need to scale further. So retail can be right, but it may not be right for every brand. So there's, I think the strategic fit and what you're trying to accomplish and the objectives are really, really important when thinking about if retail is right for you.
Great. And then what does a brand need to know about omnichannel if they're entering retail? So, determine retail is right for your brand. You have the margin capacity. You're looking to grow velocity in a certain subset of your SKUs or your brand. What do they need to know about managing many different sales channels, retail being one of them?
Yeah, so I think as it relates to omni-channel, that's a word that's been around for a long time. And a lot of brands and a lot of retailers didn't have the infrastructure in place to really deliver on the promise of omni-channel. But what we're seeing now is those infrastructures are coming to fruition. And so, not thinking about your business as store versus .com, I think is really important. I do think being ready to deliver from a total infrastructure of fulfillment and understanding that is important. And then I think, really thinking about what are the requirements and what are everything that you need to do to be successful selling in a store. And then as it relates to digital, knowing that digital is both an enabler and its own sales channel, making sure that you've got your digital assets in place. And, you've got to prioritize those things with equal weight, because if you're not ready digitally, going into an omni-channel retailer, I think can be tough, because as you think about how shopping is and the ubiquitousness of digital today, people are using their phone all the time. They're using their phone before they go to the store. They're using it in the store. And so if you're not in that venue as part of the shopping experience, you're really missing out on a really integral part of the shopping experience. And then also thinking about what your packaging is doing and getting the job done in the store, but then what is the opportunity to drive that home from a digital perspective. So you really have a huge opportunity to tell your whole story as you're thinking about how to grow your brand. And so when you think about it from a fully omni-channel perspective, there's a ton of opportunity, but then also making sure you've got all the resources in place to deliver the opportunity, because, connecting all of those dots is important, but you've got to have the resources aligned to be able to do it.
Yeah, I think when you say resources, something that comes to mind is making sure that you have adequate inventory, right? And inventory planning. So you're working with your manufacturer, your distributor, or your co-packer to, ensure that there's no stock outs, or you're not missing out on lost sales because you can't deliver the product.
I think that is incredibly important. And what you're seeing when you don't have the right level of stock, different retailers have different rules. So you may have 5 things available, but they're leaving those available for the store shoppers. So you go out of stock with your availability. And so making sure you understand what the rules of their website are and the mechanics of that are incredibly important. And then making sure, obviously if COVID taught us one thing, it's the importance of your supply chain infrastructure. So, making sure that you're really clear on fulfilling, because if you don't have the clear path to that and then the clear understanding of that, it's going to be harder and harder to be successful, especially when dealing with a retailer.
And then how do you determine which retailers you would recommend brands sell to? This is a really crucial one. We get this question a lot.
Yeah, I do think it's about your strategic fit. I mean, your strategic fit is one thing. Your operational capability and compatibility is incredibly important, because you can be the best strategic fit ever, but if you're not aligned on how you get the stuff there and get it sold, it's really not going to matter. So I think those two things are really, really important. And then seeing which retailers can offer you support and what, think about those different services that they can offer. And more retailers we're seeing offering support to smaller businesses, whether it's helping them executing some of their marketing or doing different things. So I really think you've got to look at the big picture of, where is your right audience? Where can you get it done? And then what the vested stake in of that retailer in making you successful. And so I think there's a lot of different moving parts. But I think, developing that criteria, not to be a broken record there, but I think making sure that you're thinking about it, because, you can, have that idea in mind of, I want to go to retailer X, I want to get in at Target, I want to get in at Walmart or Kroger, but really taking those things into account, because once you especially start looking deeper and at the operational side, those things can change and you need to pivot. So can't underestimate the importance of the operational connectivity.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, do you tend to recommend a smaller retailer, smaller distribution network for a smaller brand? Do you like to have the size and capacity line up, or is it really just dependent on the brand itself?
I think it's what is possible too, because if your capacity is capped, that's one thing. But if you did have the opportunity to scale, and that's where I do think some of the, the larger retailers that are offering these incubator services and different things like that, making sure that you're getting in tune with those, because if you have the capability to build the capacity, there are things that you could do to scale larger or get to bright. If capacity is a constraint and you need to, monitor how quickly you're growing, and you need to either test and learn, or there's, you need to get some capital to build more capacity, then thinking about where is the right smaller scale so that you can start to create a flywheel for your business to get it done. So I think looking at, what your capacity capabilities are is incredibly important.
Great. Thank you. How has the role of 1P and 3P marketplaces evolved? And what does a merchant need to know if they wanted to get to a retailer digitally?
I think this one, is a really good question. And I think this has vastly changed. As you think about the first era of e-commerce, it was like, you've got to grow. We've got to have e-commerce. We've got to get out there, and really it wasn't a business model focus. It was, start understanding e-commerce and go. As e-commerce has evolved over time, it's like any other business where you're really looking at what the top line and bottom line implications of those things are. And then as retailers have been looking at that, the first role of e-commerce was that infinite aisle. And you know what? If we're not going to accept it in the store, then go ahead and let's add it online. And so the role of the retailer.com was that infinite aisle. And then as the realities of margin and with e-commerce, especially for retailers that have physical store presence, ship to home is the most expensive fulfillment method. And so they want to be really smart as to how that comes to be. And so what we're seeing is that they're really monitoring the assortment online just as much as they would in the store. And so with that, your opportunity to start selling with that retailer in the marketplace as a third party has evolved. Amazon, of course, is the most mature in this regard. We're also seeing Walmart really take off with its marketplace. And then Target is taking a different, brand-centric approach to that, where they are curating what their marketplace looks like. And you actually have to try to get into their marketplace as you would their store or their .com. And so I think a lot of brands still think like, I'll just get into at that retailer digitally, I'll perform well, and then I'll get in store. And so it's not quite the same as it used to be. And so what we're seeing is a lot of the smaller brands starting out in marketplaces and having a strong marketplace strategy, and then negotiating to get into the store.
That's a great point, because that was actually Todd's question from the chat, asking about if most retailers require that they prove out sales volume, on the online marketplace. And then the idea is that that opens up the door to brick and mortar, but that's not necessarily the case depending on capacity, especially as we've seen in the post-COVID era, all of the supply chain and space constraints that the retailers are experiencing themselves with the fluctuations in supply chain and consumer demand as well. So it's not as that traditional like modularity of one-to-one. It's really dependent, and it sounds like you really have to kind of leverage your position and your success on the marketplace to advocate for brick and mortar.
Yep. And we're definitely seeing more and more merchants across retailers that do have marketplace say, like, this isn't a fit, or there's a reason, or maybe it's too small, or whatever that is. And so prove yourself on marketplace. We're seeing that come up more and more and more. And then the more that you can think about, that's where your digital shelf is really important. And then thinking about what your overall plan is in that marketplace, how you're doing your paid search, how your organic and paid search are working together. That's just becoming critically more important, but that is definitely the place where we are seeing, smaller brands come prove themselves and then start getting, into the retailer from a 1P standpoint. And so it used to be getting into brick and mortar or something like that, but now it's getting into the 1P sphere is the way that it's working today.
Great. What does a long-term retail partnership look like?
That's a good question. So, I think that varies. And I think the more that you can have, there's different nomenclature at different retailers. I tend to just call it joint business planning, whether it's a formal process or an informal process. But I think traditionally retail relationships at brands have really been between a salesperson or an account manager and a merchant. And I think as time has rolled on and digital has become ubiquitous, all things are starting to connect, whether it's your data and your supply chain. And so I think the longer term your retail partnership is and the bigger it gets, there's more and more need to make sure that you've got a really strong joint business planning process in place, even if it's informal, where, you're really you're understanding what metrics are people measured on, because I think, understanding your buyer's point of view and understanding what's important to them, and different retailers have different metrics at different times. It could even be the same retailer, but sometimes there's a very big profitability focus. Sometimes there's a very big top line focus. So making sure that you're staying on top of what their objectives are. And then as it relates to your supply chain and your fulfillment, what are the expectations? And then are you getting fined if you're not living into those expectations? What does that look like? So I think, over time, you've got to think about how you're transparent about what each of you are trying to solve. I think the more transparent you can be about what's important to you, what's important to them, and bring those things together, I find that goes a long way. Also making sure that they understand your key decision points, because what I found is sometimes, you may ask a buyer a question and it could impact whether you bring a product to market or a really big decision. And that buyer may not realize the magnitude of the question, or that they can impact potentially your business direction. And so making sure that your timing and action are aligned. And then the more and more, like I said, that you can have those end-to-end relationships so that your supply chains understand each other, your marketing and or media understand each other. And so the more you can connect those dots and the more you can have a holistic plan, the stronger the retail partnership can be.
I have a brief follow-up question for that. Does a strong long-term retail relationship mean exclusivity with one retailer? Meaning, if you want to have a long-term relationship with Target, the expectation is that your products and your product line and your brand will be more closely aligned as a Target brand than a brand that you can also find at Walmart, for example.
So I'm going to say something that is potentially a little bit, contentious from a retailer perspective.
Put in the good intel.
Retailers are always looking for exclusives, right? And they want that traffic. They want to drive those audiences, so they want those exclusive properties, we'll say. And I do think you've got to balance out your national advertising and what that does for you versus if you're at a retailer. So if a retailer wants an exclusive, do they have the scale that you're going to need? Do you already have the awareness that you need? Are they going to be backing you with their marketing if they bring you in as an exclusive? Those things are important, because what I've seen is if a product that doesn't have awareness goes into a retailer as exclusive and it's not something that they're getting behind, very rarely does it do well. And so it just doesn't have, you're hoping that people will see it on the shelf and somehow do that. And we know shopping often is an autopilot situation. So it's really, really hard to win that way. That being said, when a retailer gets behind the exclusivity, it can be amazing. And there are certain products that lend themselves more to exclusives than other. You could see maybe a beauty particular scent or particular flavor type being at one place or another, and those things playing very well. And then as a manufacturer, you've got to understand, or as a brand, what are you giving up for that exclusivity, and making sure that you are, that it's a two-way negotiation and there's mutuality there. But unless there's a really explicit plan in place, exclusives tend not to do as well as national. That being said, I have seen a ton of really strong exclusive partnerships that have worked incredibly well for both the manufacturer and the retailer. But I think it's all in transparent planning and making sure that it's the right thing. It's not always the right thing. So you've got to really make sure it makes sense for both. And always, 100% of the time, I've seen the biggest success is when the retailer and the brand are both excited and interested in it. That's when you see it blow up. If you've got the retailer interested, but the brand isn't that interested, or you've got, the brand interested, the retailer, it's never nearly as successful. That synergy of when both sides are behind it can be really explosive.
Great. I'm excited that this is our follow-up question, because we do have a question from Amy in the chat about what you would suggest to be the first 3 steps for a e-commerce brand to get into retail. So kind of giving us more information and painting the picture of the retailer journey. So where a brand typically starts, and what you would advise to be the top 3 things that you want to make sure that you have in place. And what does the ideal end state look like too?
Got it. So I'm thinking of the question that you asked in 2 ways. And one is how you get in at the retailer. And that can be a variety of ways. You can have somebody represent you. You can do it through trade shows. There's many, many different ways that you can help identify and build those relationships with retailers. So that's kind of one side of it, of actually even getting the relationship started. And then on the other side of that is when you do align with your retailer, making sure that you've got, we'll say you're beyond the contracting and terms and all that good stuff, and making sure you've set yourself up for a good business model. But then starting to think about how, laying out what your operational plan looks like. And then as it moves into getting your product in the store, as silly as this might sound, is thinking about the robustness of your item setup process. And that is really going to, that is ground zero for how you are going to show up digitally. And so having an incredibly robust, really understanding what their new item process is, and being as robust. I think, when it came to store, a lot of times, you would do whatever you could to quickly get your item set up, and then it would show up in the store, and then, you're doing all of that. As it relates to this world of omnichannel, and especially e-commerce, that the robustness of that process is so important, because you need to be showing up in filters and your search engine optimization and all of that. And so I cannot put enough emphasis on your new item setup process. From there, you want to be lobbying for where you do show up on your shelf. So you want to show up as well as you can. In any 4-foot section, they talk about the diamond and being in the diamond of that 4-foot section. So making sure you've got the right placement, and then thinking about what placement is right around the store. Do you need to be adjacent to something that makes sense that could help drive that awareness? So how are you thinking about your placement around the store and within that category? Same on the digital side, thinking about what category are you showing up in? Which of the digital shelves within that retailer are you showing up on? Are you lobbying for and negotiating showing up, more full funnel within the realm of that retailer? So on the homepage, or, whatever makes sense for the objective and your product. And then, so from there, and then making sure that you're doing a really nice job with your product detail pages, because that's really going to drive whether or not you convert. And it's also going to drive whether you show up in a search. So with the attention that you pay on your physical shelf, you've got to pay that same level of attention, or possibly more, on that digital shelf, because that could impact before they're at the store, while they're at the store, and after. So, really, if you think about that acceleration Omni model that I showed at the top of the call, it really starts with your item setup, making sure that you're available online and in store, where you're shelved, where you're paying for display and extra eyes, and then how you're driving that traffic and creating your conversion. I think it's very much, the more you can align to that analytical kind of framework and process and make sure you're monitoring that, then I think the more you drive and maximize your success.
Great. Okay. If I'm understanding correctly, so a lot of item and data integrity. So really being willing and able to do the work to get all of the information on the front end to the retailer and make sure that that all looks, perfectly above board. And then really advocating for yourself in the relationship in terms of how many stores you want to be, how many doors you want to see your product in, where you want to see yourself in the shelf, what section, and sort of like optimizing and working with the retailer with that. And that's probably also an opportunity to work with Market Performance Group, who does this obviously for thousands of brands, and kind of explains to them the process of the diamond that you explain to us, right? You might not think that as an e-commerce brand that like physical product placement means a lot. So working with a consultant in that space can really help you kind of be aware of something that you might not know is important to brick and mortar success. I do want to call out, and I'm jumping around in the questions to kind of relevant to the topics at hand. So Nikki asked on if you could elaborate on ways to start the relationships with the retailers, and if you would recommend holding off on initiating those conversations until sales volume or visibility, brand visibility, is at a certain critical point.
I think it depends in terms of your critical point, and depends on the size of the retailer. But like I said, there are a lot of companies. Our company, Market Performance Group, is one of those that can help represent you, help you build your selling story, and help you build that initial connectivity with a retailer. There are different groups that will represent you to do that. Also, there's the incubator programs, and if you have a group like ours represent you, we can certainly help you with that. But really making sure that you're understanding if there are any of those incubator programs, and then also tons of trade shows. So depending on what your product is, it could be anything from grocery shop or shop talk. It could be a specific a fancy food show. So there's a lot of different conferences, trade shows, ways to make connections with brands. And then you're seeing more and more digitally a call to brands happening. So there's a lot of different entry points in to retail. My favorite is Market Performance Group, but there's a lot of ways to do it, and a lot of unpaid ways to do it as well.
Yeah. And, as the partner manager for Market Performance Group, I'm going to second that and say that, we've had some brands that have had a lot of success that we've sent your way, and just first stage is talking to the retailers themselves and getting in front of the buyers. So it's been a really symbiotic process working with you for the brands that we recommended. And you did mention the incubator program, and so we had a question from Earl in the chat about the process for applying for inclusion in the incubator programs. Obviously, I know that they tend to be, as always, very retail dependent. And as you pointed out, Market Performance Group can help with the application for the incubator program, but anything kind of else that we need to know about that or where to find these incubator programs?
Yeah, so what I'm seeing is they're popping up, changing. Different retailers have different strategies. So I don't think it's a process that is in stone at all. I think it's changing all the time. So, making sure that you're searching the internet or reaching out to somebody like us, I think, it's a very dynamic slate out there. I just saw a new one from Walmart pop up the other day. So there's definitely not hard and fast rules on that, and it's changing quite a bit. So depending on which retailer you're looking at, making sure, researching that. But it's something that I think is dynamic and changing. And I think the retailers are actually learning in real time. So, as they do a program, they're learning from what works or what doesn't work. And then, they're changing the way they're going to market there too.
Yeah, something I've specifically seen with a lot of the incubator programs is they tend to be vertical or maybe brand differentiator specific. So for example, like a women-owned brand incubator, right, through Target.
Yep.
Target wants to make sure that they're empowering women-owned brands and making sure that, increasing the percentage of women-owned brands that are in their stores. So they might run an incubator program specifically for that vertical, for beauty or for wellness or for home or for digital, whatever it may be. So definitely, I think, do your research when it comes to finding something that's maybe specific for what you offer that's different to the retailer as well. Great. Okay, and then managing sales across different retail partners. So you've made it to the point where you have at least two retailers that are selling your product. How do you make sure that you manage the competing attention between those two retailers and manage the inventory that you need to be able to allocate to both of those sales channels?
Yeah, that's a biggie. So, and then, each of the retailers have their, process, timing, different infrastructures. So I think the more that you can understand that, the better. And then, you will need eyes and mind on each of those different retailers. It's a pretty significant lift, especially if you're in an omnichannel situation. So making sure that you are either partnering with somebody that can do it on your behalf, again, shameless plug, Marketing Performance Group, or that you're ready to make sure that you can invest in the right teams. And I think, you need, obviously, at a minimum, a sales and supply chain person. You're hearing about the rise of retail media networks, which were out of the reach of a lot of smaller brands, but you are seeing them do things that make them more approachable for smaller brands. We also do a lot of search and lower funnel media for brands. We offer that, a full suite of marketing and media, but as it comes to smaller brands with smaller budgets, those lower funnel tactics are really important. So, there are places that can do that on your behalf. And then there's places where, you can do that directly on your own. So, but definitely, obviously, sales and supply chain are job one, and then thinking about how you're driving your demand. And then the more and more, we're in the land of analytics, and, the speed of business is so incredibly fast that anytime you can have connected data, that is going to be really important too.
So any advice to brands looking to launch into retailers ahead of peak season? It's mind-boggling to think that we're as close to Q4 as we are, and probably maybe in retail terms as close to buying season for 2024 as we are. So advice for moving quickly into retail for the remainder of the year, or how to maybe set yourself up best for success when it comes to the buying season next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And buying season, is different at different retailers. They have different planogram times where they change, transition, and do new items. So making sure that you understand what that timing looks like. Walmart, for instance, a lot of line review seasons, but that is happening right now where they're reviewing what those products look like. And then they will be making plans for what their planograms look like. That being said, like I said, it's different review seasons, and then different line review timing even across categories. So understanding where your retailer is in their planning cycle by category is important. And then if you've got something ready to go today, it is insane. If you're not used to working with retail, you don't realize how much infrastructure planning, dot connecting, spreadsheets are in place when it comes to getting in at retail. And a lot of times those, merchandise peak seasons are planned a year or 9 months ahead of time. So, always the way I think about the approach to business planning is year on year. And you're usually planning, if you have something that spans a couple of months, you're usually beginning the planning of that before the end of that activity. And so you're kind of learning in real time as you're planning. But I think it's safest to say a year out at large retailers. Smaller retailers, those things can change, but there's so many different pieces and parts to pull together that the longer the lead time, the better. And then, of course, there's always marketplace where you can jump in if you want to do it on your own ahead of the season if you've missed that particular retailer's planning season.
And I do want to make a quick shameless plug for ShipBob's Walmart Marketplace Direct Connection. So if you've established a relationship with Walmart or you applied online, they make it relatively easy to apply online and get your product on Walmart Marketplace. And if you're an existing ShipBob merchant or thinking about working with us, it's a couple of click integration to get selling on Walmart and get shipping with ShipBob. So make it relatively easy for that online marketplace. And then Nikki has a kind of a specific question about the buyer cycle, saying, that they had a meeting with a buyer for a large retailer about a month and a half ago. Do you recommend reaching back out or following up and waiting? I know it can often be a very much of a hurry up and wait relationship with the buyers and the buyer's schedule, so to speak. So if you want to give a little bit more maybe advice on that topic.
Well, obviously each buyer is their own individual, but what I've found from working with buyers, through the years is that buyers are busy, very busy. I was going to say just like all of us, but it may be exponentially busier than us. They're seeing so many different suppliers, looking at so many different products, and so I think there is the hurry up and wait. I do think there are ways to do it very respectfully. But also I do think one big inflection point is if you have a key decision to make. And so you're either going to build capacity or not build capacity, or there's something like that. A lot of times the buyers will have no idea that hearing from them or not hearing from them will make or break what that decision is. So if they can be involved in a decision for you, that, if they don't give you the answer, you won't have the capacity. If they do say yes 2 weeks from now, that I think making sure that they understand what the context is, and then making sure that you have, that they understand why you're reaching out and that you want them to be able to have a say in that decision. That I find is very important because they may have a big internal meeting that they're working on. They may have this or that. But if they do know there's some sort of inflection point in terms of your timing and action, then it's a lot more likely that they will not have wanted to miss out on that. So I think making sure they're aware of your timing and action and those types of things is really critical. And then, I think it's like the golden rule: do unto others as you would like to have done unto you. So, just thinking about, are you adding value when you're doing it? Are you putting more work on them with something that you're asking? So I would just say, whatever you can do to help your buyer, help make it easier to answer. If there's information needed, don't make them ask for it. Make sure you've got your case well prepared and it's easy to say yes. Or a lot of times buyers will agree with you, but they need to sell it inside. So help them build that business case so that they can sell it and that they don't have to do all the hard work just because they want to say yes. Don't put them in the position to have to do that for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that can really help in the conversations that I've been privy to is just anticipating the questions the buyer is going to ask. And it can be, it's everything. It's down to the product, it's down to the components, it's down to manufacturing timelines, it's down to margins, it's down to all of those things. So making sure that you're covering all of your bases is like sort of a business plan and part of your pitch. And then also kind of creating that physical touch component too. So it always doesn't hurt to have some physical, some physical representation of your brand, whether that's sending them product or sending the buyer team product, giving them something, a tangible reminder of your brand and something that they can always kind of go back to. Great.
I think that's great advice.
Okay, and that would be the end of the questions that I have for Heather. So I do want to give the chat the opportunity if there are any other questions that come to mind before we conclude. So far, it's been so good. Thanks for everyone for participating in the questions that you've had. I do want to call out Todd's comment that he said that he would rather not work with Amazon, so he's more interested in brick and mortar. I think a common refrain on our sales team is that Amazon is a necessary evil, but it obviously doesn't have to be the biggest piece of the pie if you don't want it to be. So if you're interested in brick and mortar.
Yeah, I do think that, Amazon was more of a necessary evil, but as other retailers are coming up to scale, and we're seeing how, like, the rise of omnichannel from more of a shopper perspective, I do think it is not as necessary of an evil as it used to be, depending on your brand and your product. And it does have, a pretty high cost to serve. So I do think comparing your overall cost to serve of Amazon and, your other retailers is really important. And, sometimes that cost to serve absolutely makes sense because you want to drive more awareness or something like that. But I do think it depends on, like I said, that strategic fit. And so, just making sure that you're really understanding top to bottom what your cost of serve looks like as you're picking which retailers.
I like that phrasing, terminology, cost to serve. Yeah. Can you give the chat a moment in case there are any other additional questions? Heather, I guess to throw you maybe a softball, hopefully not a curveball. Is there anything else that we haven't covered today that kind of comes to mind in terms of something that you think is important to know when it comes to managing a relationship with a retailer as an e-commerce online brand?
Not necessarily as an e-commerce online brand, but I think just in general, really keeping in mind that ideally you both want the same thing, to be successful. And so the more I think you can humanize your approach to your buyer and really think about, the challenges that they're facing and what life is like for them, I think it can prepare you. Because I think a lot of times you naturally get into selling mode. They're buyers, you're talking to the buyer, and you kind of create this dynamic of, they're here and you're there. The more you can think about this as a partnership and what are you doing? Like, what are their career goals? What are you doing to help them? And, really thinking of it as more of a holistic human to human interaction, I think it can just set you up for a better conversation with your buyer. And so, just be the supplier you would want if you were a buyer, I think is really how I would think about that.
Great. I like your use of the golden rule as it relates to managing retail relationships. I think that's best practice in all areas of life, but yeah, especially so when you're, staring down a relationship with someone who manages some of the largest supply chain complexities in the world, such as a buyer for Walmart or buyer for Target.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, sometimes you think like Walmart or Target, but, at the end of the day, you're dealing with individuals and, they may be having a hard day or managing kids or, so I think the more and more, you can relate on a human level, I really think that changes the dynamic and, no one likes to be sold to if you really think about it that way. I know I, as an individual, when you feel like somebody starts selling, you just sort of clam up, whether that's, if you're out walking or, whatever that is. And so I think the more you can remember as an individual what it feels like to be sold to, and not thinking about it so much as a selling endeavor, but how are you telling the story, and then how are you creating the business model? I think the more and more you can do that, it can really change the trajectory of your relationship with your buyer.
Another question that I have that comes up quite often, I think, for the brands that we work with, and we work with a lot of digitally native brands, obviously e-commerce, they tend to have their own websites. They tend to have really tight messaging around the brand ethos, the voice, the component, the look. How do you make sure that you can maintain that in a relationship with a retailer? I think maybe that can be a point of hesitancy when it comes to an e-commerce brand, making that transition to retail, because you're putting your brand's voice, your brand's reputation, the ethos of your brand into someone else's hands. How do you find or strike that balance?
Yeah, I think that is really important, because retail is sort of like where your brand meets the shopper. It's a very important situation. So again, it goes back to, is that retailer's approach in line with where your brand is? And if you think about it, there's very stereotypical ways to think about a Target or a Walmart, and kind of income levels and things like that, which I think is an antiquated way of doing it. If you think about Walmart, they're an everyday low price. So it's not likely that your brand is going to be, you're going to sign up for what you're getting there. And then the way they do their promotions isn't, they're very choiceful in that. Target, we know, is very significant in terms of the ability to help brands brand build. So I think you've got to look at, how do they do their promotions? How do they do their advertising? How do they showcase the brands that they steward? And so I think it's really looking at that retailer holistically on, if my brand were there and you look at all of those things, would that make me, would I be okay with that? And then of course there's always pricing, like minimum pricing agreements and different things that you can do there. But I think, just making sure that you feel comfortable, and certainly different brands have different retail channels that they will or won't play in, because they're more luxury or because they want to be more accessible. So I think it's really making sure that, you feel comfortable with that. And then I think, as you look at, if you're doing D2C and they have to come to you, that's a different shopping experience than if they can discover you and see you versus other players. So, I think it depends on the shopping experience that, your potential consumer may want. So I think it's just how you think about kind of the context that they would be buying in, and certainly direct to consumer and retail can live very viably together. So I think it can definitely be an and.
I know EDI was briefly mentioned in a question from, I believe it was from Nikki. No, sorry, from Amy. Feel free to punt that if that's not your wheelhouse, but I know that's also something that we do get a lot of questions about, is just managing the retailer's digital operational requirements. Obviously, there's the looming threat of chargebacks. So maybe just some quick advice on what the best way to be prepared for that would be. Maybe similar to how you would manage the inventory, just making sure that you're super prepared on the front end with the data integrity and all of the rules that are required.
Yeah, I think understanding what those rules are, it's certainly not, my area of expertise, but I do think more and more retailers are making things like that accessible. As the longer that omnichannel and this way of working and all of these things have been around, the more and more retailers have those capabilities in place. But I definitely think making sure you understand their rules, and then, is that a capability you have? Is that something you need to borrow, build, and how you think about that. But definitely not my center of expertise, although again, with MPG being an end-to-end operation, I have friends back at home that can help with that.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a really, really good question and something important to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So you're truly a full service house. There's someone that's the dreaded EDI expert. Great. And did we have any other questions before we start to wrap up? Wanted to give anyone in the chat the opportunity to ask Heather any questions that they might have. Okay. Well, in that case, Heather, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. This was extremely informative webinar, and we really appreciate you bringing all of your expertise on this process. I think this is a really, really valuable learning experience for the brands that we work with, and anyone who's in our ecosystem about what it looks like to get into retail and manage those relationships.
Well, thank you, Meg. It's been really, really nice working with you as we prepare for it, and it's been great working with you today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and please feel free to follow up with any questions that you have. We have our contact information, both my contact information and Heather's. For those of you that work with ShipBob that have any questions about what the next steps would be, please feel free to shoot me over an email, because we will get you that white glove referral introduction to the folks at Market Performance Group. So thank you everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.